Hello everyone, here we are again, time for another run-through of movies that I saw last month. A lot of people really liked the collection of movies for January's list, which is great, except I felt like, oh no, they're setting the bar too high for February. I hope that's not the case. I hope you won't be disappointed by this month's selection. Movie number 1 is a horror flick from 1958, Earth vs. the Spider, also known just as The Spider. All in all, this one wasn't too bad, considering what I expected. A girl and her boyfriend go looking for her missing father and find a giant spider living in a cave. The police don't buy the story at first, but the science teacher does, so they all troop down there to investigate, and eventually the spider goes on a rampage across town, because the movie wouldn't be complete if that didn't happen. There are some questionable special effects here, which I would be inclined to blame on the quality of the print Amazon Prime is streaming, except the quality otherwise was actually quite good, so it's just that their giant spider effects were a bit wonky. What's even more questionable is some of the writing and some of the acting from the teens. But hey, it's a decently fun monster movie, like Tarantula meets the Blob, but not as good. The worst part was the ending, which I thought got kind of dull. My favorite part was the spider's so-called web, an obvious oversized net with sticky stuff sprayed on it and holes big enough for the actors to slip through. Hilarity ensues when they have to pretend to be caught and flail around in panic. Movie number 2 is a World War II film that I picked for my parents' entertainment, 2011's Age of Heroes. IMDb describes it as, quote, the true story of the formation of Ian Fleming's 30 Commando Unit, a precursor for the elite forces in the UK. Turns out that's kind of a misleading synopsis. For one thing, it made me think Ian Fleming would be the central focus, but while James Darcy's classy intelligence officer who puts together the team is credited as Fleming, so I guess he is in the movie, that wasn't clear when I was watching it. Also, the more I read up on this movie, the more it seems it was just inspired by the true story. It's confusing. Anyway, it is about the formation of a commando unit and their first impossible mission, dropping into Norway to steal info about new German radio tech. Frankly, I felt pretty mixed about this one. I didn't like the first half hour or so. The main character, played by Danny Dyer, was aggravatingly cocky, and I couldn't stand him, but I didn't like the antagonistic characters either. Once the mission began, it definitely got better. However, the ending was another letdown. It's abrupt and feels unfinished, prompting us to ask, wait a minute, what about this thing, and what about that? The story held my attention, but I felt like I'd seen a lot of it done before and done better. Oh yes, and Sean Bean is essentially the star. No, I'm not going to tell you if he dies in this movie. Movie number 3 is a quirky swashbuckler, 1975's Zorro, starring Alain Delon. It's an Italian-made film set in pre-independent Mexico, starring a Frenchman as a Spaniard, with the antagonist played by Stanley Baker, who was Welsh. Wrap your head around that! I've seen the Douglas Fairbanks Zorro, and half of the first Antonio Banderas Zorro, and the Tyrone Power one, 1940's The Mark of Zorro, is one of my favorite swashbucklers. In this version of the story, the new governor of a tumultuous Spanish colony is murdered before he can arrive. With his last breath, he tells his friend Don Diego to go and secretly assume the governorship in his place. Don Diego does so, disguising himself as a mincing and helpless coward, letting the greedy and corrupt Colonel Huerta take advantage. However, Don Diego also assumes the masked identity of El Zorro, pursuing justice on behalf of the poor, oppressed villagers, and confounding Colonel Huerta at every turn. As I said, this is a quirky movie, but it's a lot of fun if you let yourself get used to that fact. Alain Delon was hot, but also athletic and charming and funny, both as the wily bandit and as the imposter governor. Unfortunately, the film is dubbed, at least the version that I watched, so his is not the voice you hear, even though, strangely, you can tell he's speaking English. I guess they didn't want Zorro to have a French accent. I wouldn't have minded. I always prefer to hear the actor himself speaking the lines rather than some other guy. There are some crazy and kooky elements here, one of my favorites being the dog that sounds like it's also been dubbed by a human. There's some slapstick, which makes me feel like the movie's intended more for a younger audience. And the song! The movie's got a peppy theme song, which got funnier every time it started playing, which was pretty much every time Zorro showed up to do Zorro things, although wisely they curbed it back during the nice long climactic sword fight, a sequence that takes place at some kind of castle, mansion, fortress place, and makes full use of the sets. There were two disappointments. First, the print quality of the DVD I rented from the library was really bad. Supposedly there is a more recent Blu-ray release that has better quality, and it might even restore the original audio. I haven't checked. The second disappointment is that I didn't get to see the whole film. It's a 120-minute movie, but our version was just 90 minutes. I did feel like what we saw was pretty much complete, although there were a few abrupt cuts and transitions, but when I started collecting pictures, there was all this stuff I didn't recognize. I feel slightly robbed, especially because it seems they cut a few scenes of Zorro with the village kids, and that would have been adorable. So there's that, but otherwise I quite enjoyed it. Movie number 4 is one that was definitely effective, but I didn't really enjoy watching it. 2010's Frozen, a horror thriller about 3 people who get stranded on a ski lift. It's a simple plot revolving around a nightmarish situation. If you like snowy survival stories where people are at risk of dying in the harsh elements, or if you like thrillers with a small group trapped in an isolated setting, you might like this. I like both of those things, so it has that going for it. But for each intense and terrifying scene, it seems there's a lengthy segment of often insipid conversation between our 3 not very likable protagonists, who ended up in this awful situation thanks at least in part to their own irresponsibility. Therefore, it was hard for me to feel completely sympathetic. If they didn't want me to dislike them so much, they should have done away with the tedious 20-minute setup, where the 2 guys just come across as jerks. But then the movie would be like an hour long. The other downside, at least as far as I'm concerned, being a squeamish person, is that this movie has some really unsettling and gross stuff. Obviously that's intentional, which is why I say the movie was very effective. I had to look away quite a bit and think about something else a couple times. Unfortunately, one pivotal scene, the most traumatic one in the movie I'd say, reminded me of something else that was even worse. So yeah, this wasn't a pleasant time for me, and I was glad when it was over. Movie number 5 is an interesting multi-genre film, 1947's Pursued. It's primarily a western, but it's also a psychological drama, a revenge film, a romance, and a bit of a noir. Robert Mitchum stars as the adopted son of Judith Anderson, raised with her own 2 children after she plucked him out of mysterious circumstances. He's plagued by vague memories of his past and grows up unaware that he has an enemy who is determined to kill him. My main interest in this film was to see Teresa Wright star opposite Robert Mitchum. That's a combination I've never seen before, and they did very well together. The narrative is told in flashback by Mitchum to Wright, and your impression of the nature of their current relationship status keeps changing. It's a good movie if you're a fan of either actor. Teresa Wright is both sweet and vulnerable, and cold and calculating. And Mitchum's character has both a light and a dark side as well, so whether you prefer him as a hero or a villain, you kind of get a taste of each, and this is right before his career took off. Movie number 6 is another war film, one that a friend recommended, about 8 years ago, 1968's Hell in the Pacific. It's the middle of World War II, and an American man and a Japanese man, Lee Marvin and Toshiro Mifune, end up together on an otherwise uninhabited island. Being enemies, they first try to kill each other, and then to torture each other and drive each other crazy. Then they settle for working together to survive, but you always wonder if the truce will last. It's fun to see a movie that just has 2 characters in it, add in that neither one speaks the other's language, and it's like, how's that gonna work? But Marvin and Mifune are more than able to pull it off. I didn't really feel like the film favored one side or the other, although I did end up sympathizing with one more. The film had a lot of amusing moments, stemming largely from the fact that these two men are so different and they're stuck together. Lee Marvin was especially nutty, while I came to find Toshiro Mifune rather charming. I've seen him in a couple other films, but never found him as likable as I did here. It's got some artsy moments that are a little unusual in a World War II survival film, but for the most part, I liked this movie. Until the end. The end was terrible. It felt like a cop-out, the kind of absurd, non-resolution resolution that an incompetent writer comes up with when he gets to a certain point and doesn't know how to finish the story. The DVD included an alternate ending, which we watched, looking for some kind of satisfaction, and it was also kind of lame, but not as bad. So, However, I still liked the movie. I don't think this is a case where you should let a crummy ending ruin the rest of the journey. Movie number 7 is also a war movie, a morale-boosting U.S. Army Air Force film from 1943 titled Aerial Gunner. The film quality for this one on Prime is terrible, but the movie itself isn't great either. Two enemies end up serving together, fall for the same girl, and so on. I didn't like Chester Morris's character, and Richard Arlen's character was a milquetoast. The story did have some potential, and it had a decent part for character actor Keith Richards, also a tiny early role for Robert Mitchum, but other than that, there's not a whole lot to write home about here. Last one, movie number 8, is 1950's Try and Get Me, a crime drama in which Frank Lovejoy plays an unemployed man desperate for a job so he can support his wife and kid, soon-to-be kids plural. If you know your film noir, you know unemployment and desperation can be a lethal combination. Lovejoy has a chance meeting with an individual, played by Lloyd Bridges, who promises quick money for easy work, except it turns out the easy work is driving a getaway car for Bridges, who turns out to be a small-time criminal on a gas station general store hold-up spree. The already bad situation spirals out of control when Bridges aims for a higher target and sparks public outrage. There are solid performances all around here. Lovejoy is sympathetic, even when his frayed nerves make him lash out. Bridges goes from slick but nice guy to, ooh, bit of a psycho, real quick. Kathleen Ryan gives a sensitive performance as Lovejoy's wife, and Richard Carlson provides the dramatic fulcrum as the journalist whose emotion-fueled columns generate public furor and thirst for justice. The film takes a very unexpected turn in the final act, delivering a harsh invective against the thoughtless emotionalism of the press, a media that arrogantly and self-righteously proclaims it's serving the public interest, when its real interest is its own financial gain. This emotionalism and partiality in reporting whips people up into a panic, which leads to a frenzied mob demanding its own form of justice. And it's not long before the mob is out of control, and those who crave chaos and anarchy and the breakdown of law and order are able to take charge. Yes, this film packs a much heavier punch than I expected. The film as a whole is a solid crime drama. The ending leaves a lasting impression. Okay, that's the list of what else I saw in February. It's another mix of mixed reviews. I hope you enjoyed this video. Feel free to share your thoughts on any of the movies that I mentioned in the comments below, and I'll be back soon. Thanks for watching.